Today, I want to talk about Limbo. Limbo for me was kind of my introduction to indie games. I think at the time when I had first gotten my 360, I don't know if I was really aware of what indie games were. I mean, I'm sure there was some sort of indie games that were made on consoles that maybe I had purchased. But from my kid brain, Limbo was like the first time that I could think of that I knew what an indie game was. I think I was browsing the 360 marketplace or something at the time, and Limbo had popped up. It looked really cool. I remember downloading the demo and playing for like an hour and was kind of blown away, honestly. I remember playing this all the way back as a kid. Limbo was made in 2010 by Playdead and published by Microsoft Game Studios. The game had made over $7.5 million in 2010, and I think eventually reached over like 3 million copies sold. The developers Playdead have also made another game called Inside, which I was unaware existed, and after I played Limbo, I'm very interested in playing Inside someday. Limbo was conceived in 2004 by Arndt Jensen, who was the creative director, I think, at the time. He worked at IO Interactive prior to that, and quote, this comes from the wiki, says that he became dissatisfied with the increasingly corporate nature of the company. It's always interesting to me to learn more about video game development. I'm not claiming that I could develop video games, nor do I understand the ins and outs and all the nuances that come with developing a video game, because it's not just a bunch of developers in a room on computers making a game. There's a lot more things that go into game developing, and funding for these games is one of them. I've always felt like there's a disconnect between the game developers, investors, and producers of the game, the people that are keeping the machine rolling so the developers can keep working on the game. I always feel like there's a disconnect there, and we've seen it with tons of games over the years where games get released and they're unfinished, or things get changed within a game because they're trying to appease investors. One thing that I can think of at the top of my head was Halo Combat Evolved was supposed to be just released as Halo, but I can't remember specifically who. Some of the higher-ups at Microsoft wanted them to put Combat Evolved, which is kind of silly in retrospect because you have Halo 2 and Halo 3 that followed that, and they didn't have any subtitles. Regardless, there's things of that nature that happens all the time in game developments, and it's quite sad, but it is what it is, because people that are investing in the games don't necessarily even play video games and may not know what makes a game good or not. There's a quote too in the wiki from Mr. Jensen where he says that investors tried to control the company with no usable knowledge or respect. It just goes to show you too right there though that like AAA developers are dealing with pressure from higher ups and input, and it goes all the way to indie developers as well when they're not being able to fund their projects 100% out of pocket, because once again, making video games is expensive. Regardless though, it's just one of those things that I can wrap my head around it. I wish it didn't exist, I guess. I wish that investors were able to just let game developers develop games, but it doesn't always go that way. And I'm not saying that developers are perfect. There are probably games out there that developers have made funded fully out of pocket and they suck. They're donkey balls. So I guess the point I'm trying to make here though is what happens when somebody's working in the corporate world of video games and then they leave and they're able to just use their entire creative arsenal of ideas, and when they're able to use that unadulterated. That is what Limbo is to me. Limbo is so freaking cool. It's such a simple game, but very complex at the same time. Limbo is a 2D platformer with a black and white color palette and a very cartoony aesthetic, but it's also very dark. The biggest draw for Limbo for me, and you get this right at the very beginning of the game, is all of the different puzzles. There are so many times where you're going into the next area or the next, screen on the game, and you run into puzzles. You see different items and objects around the map. You see different things that you can interact with. and it is up to you to figure out how to solve these specific puzzles. Now, I don't even want to get into any spoiler territory of the puzzles, because I feel like this game, Limbo, has so much creativity. Why does this game from 2010 have more creativity than most AAA games nowadays? Some of the ways you go about solving the puzzles is mind-blowing. Once again, the puzzles of this game really made it for me. There are times where you are racking your brain on how to solve a specific puzzle, because there's a lot of physics-based puzzles too, which is really, really fun. It's different. I enjoy it. But once again, there are times where you're racking your brain trying to figure out this specific puzzle, and then when you finally do and it clicks, you just think, man, hell yeah. Limbo's really, really dope. If you haven't played it, you should. I also, I guess, need to mention that there is a story there of Limbo. It follows a little boy trying to find his sister. There's a giant spider too that you're always dealing with. Eventually that spider comes back up into play. Anyway, that really to me didn't matter all that much. I'm sure to some it does. For me, it was the puzzles. It was the basic, simple gameplay of I'm moving from left to right, I'm platforming, and I'm trying to solve all of these puzzles, which are so unique, so colorful. I love Limbo. I wish I would have played it years ago when I first discovered it. I mean, well over a decade ago now. It was probably around then, 2010, 2011, that I had learned about Limbo. Once again, one of the first indie games that I can even remember discovering. So yeah, that was Limbo for me. I probably will play through it again. It was a quick playthrough. I completed it in 3 hours. I think it was like 2 play sessions that I had beaten the game in. I didn't really know how long it was going into it, but I feel satisfied. I feel like, yeah, 3 hours was a good length. It was 3 hours of very creative puzzles, and it didn't feel like there was any filler. It all felt good. It felt cohesive. The pacing was good. It felt like it flowed, and I really enjoyed this game. So if you haven't played Limbo, you should. If you have played Limbo, let me know what your guys' thoughts are down below in the comments. And as always, I appreciate you guys watching. Keep it rad.